dark age, a world of persecution, misery and death. By the end of the Second World War, 1 in 5 of its population had been killed. Poland then was, in that neat slogan devised by its wartime propagandists, first to fight. Its defensive campaign in September 1939 opened the Second World War in Europe, a 5-week struggle that prefaced nearly 300 weeks of slaughter. It cost as many as 250,000 lives on all sides, and showcased many of the brutal practices that would feature so strongly in the later conflict: the targeting of civilian populations, indiscriminate aerial bombing, and mass killings. Invaded and occupied by Europe's 2 preeminent totalitarian powers, Poland would be exposed to every horror that modern conflict could devise. Just as the Wehrmacht unleashed race war against the Poles in the west, so the Red Army imported class war in the east. Poland's citizens would be sifted and sorted by either side, with those deemed undesirable subjected to arrest and deportation if they were lucky, state-sanctioned murder if they were not. The Polish campaign also had a significance well beyond Poland's frontiers. It brought Britain and France into the war. Both countries had guaranteed Poland's territorial integrity in the spring of 1939 in a vain attempt to halt German expansion. Consequently, it was the Western Allies' defence of that country, however nominally interpreted, that transformed the war from a Central European squabble into a conflict of worldwide significance. Bearing all of this in mind, it would be fair to expect that Poland's brave, brief war of 1939 might be well known. However, it is not. Indeed, it's no exaggeration to say that it has been all but forgotten outside Poland. Despite our collective obsession with all aspects of the Second World War, the September campaign always seems somehow to fall through the cracks, ignored or passed over in a few sentences. Consequently, it is barely known or understood in the English-speaking historiography. A glance at some of the most popular history books of the last few years should serve to illustrate the point. Whereas enthusiastic readers can peruse competing volumes on the Ardennes campaign, Dunkirk or D-Day, they would search in vain for much modern scholarship on Poland's War of 1939. Aside from a couple of specialist military studies, the last book devoted to the subject, Nicholas Bethel's The War Hitler Won, was published in 1972. General works are little better. An examination of popular histories of the Second World War by some of Britain's most widely read historians reveals the scale of the problem. On average, out of some 700 pages of text, they devote just 16 to the defence of Poland in 1939, which often include the wider matter of the entry into the war of Britain and France. Some ignore the subject entirely, or are almost comically Anglo-centric, describing the outbreak of the war by referring solely to Whitehall politics, or scarcely seeing beyond the agonies perceived on the cricket pitches of southeast England, while making no mention of the very real battles then being fought on Polish soil. Moreover, those that examine the subject in anything more than a cursory manner tend to rely almost entirely on German sources, the usually self-serving memoirs of those that participated in the invasion, and the often turgid regimental histories of the German army that tend to make non-military historians' eyes bleed. The results are predictably myopic. Historians repeat Nazi propaganda tropes almost verbatim, ignore the Soviet invasion entirely, and shamefully write the Poles out of their own history. Little wonder, then, that most readers' knowledge of the September campaign barely extends beyond the hoary old myth of cavalry against tanks. Yet the real problem is more profound. History, as we know, is written primarily by the winner. As Hitler pithily put it on the very eve of the Polish campaign, the victor will never be asked if he told the truth. And in this example, none of the victors, short or long term, had any interest in telling the true story of the defence of Poland. The Germans spun their narrative of the September campaign as best they could in the early years of the war, and produced a host of memoirs, coffee table books, and pseudo-histories.